Over the past year, Flesh and Blood has seen an absolute deluge of reprints, ranging from the high-end generics to specific class staples and legendaries. I had made a video at the very beginning of 2025 where I talked about the prices of this game, outlining how we went from just a few expensive staples to many expensive staples and expensive class cards as well. My solution to this was suggesting that LSS focus on reprinting the main core Majestics, Command & Conquer, Codex of Frailty, Warmonger's Diplomacy, and Enlightened Strike in the expansion slot of sets in order to bring down the top end of this game, and to my amazement, they did it. And more. From the Hunted all the way to the upcoming set Compendium of Wraith, we have been seeing reprint after reprint after reprint put into the expansion slot of sets, with even more sprinkled into armory decks. But with such a rapid pace, there is the question of whether or not this is just right or too much, and so today, we need to talk about Flesh and Blood's reprints. Before we dive headfirst into what's been both good and bad about all the reprints, I want to first discuss my personal philosophy behind them so that, while you might not agree, you can at least understand my reference point. To put it simply, I believe that reprints should serve the purpose of opening up a window of opportunity for cards to become more accessible. When a card is reprinted, the price should absolutely come down, but only to a point. I've said it many times in videos before, but cards need to, in some shape or form, have value. If things are too cheap, well, no one buys worthless boxes, stores don't open them to sell the singles, and the entire market ecosystem collapses. While it feels nice to say all cards should be dirt cheap, this simply isn't realistic. However, when cards get to a point where players are having to drop $200 to $300 on a playset, well then I think a reprint is in order so that newer players can, actually access the card at a reasonable price, for a luxury hobby at least. However, I don't think that the reprint should completely destroy the value of the card, and I also think that if done right, the card should start to climb back up in price again over time if it's still highly played, where it will then be due for another reprint. This is what I mean when I say reprint should open up a window of opportunity. I don't think the card should go from $50 to just $5 with a single reprint for reasons I'll get into later, but a $50 card dropping to say $25, $30 makes it more accessible to the average person before it inevitably climbs back up towards the $50 range. Of course, this is all much easier said than done, as TCG markets are an ever-changing thing, especially with a game like Flesh and Blood. This game is almost entirely player-driven, and so the price of cards can wildly fluctuate with every new set, ban, or hero ascending to living legend. If something suddenly becomes meta, you can bet your ass the price of cards for that deck will jump. If something falls from the meta, then the reverse will happen, and this is what makes reprinting cards such a tricky balance. However, with my philosophy around the goal of reprints laid out, I now want to talk about the overwhelming amount of good that these reprints are doing. Now this may be a bit of a shocker, but I am very happy with all the reprints we've been getting. Flesh and Blood has been growing at a pretty reasonable pace since heavy hitters, and with that comes an increased demand for cards, of which there's an ever-shrinking supply. Again, not only do we have the core generic staples, there's also a lot of class cards that have just slowly ticked up in price over the years. Take Imposing Visage, for example. This card is $25 now, but I remember when Everfest released, it was a 50-cent bulk Majestic. I even thought about buying a few extra copies, but never got around to it, and now I'm kicking myself in the ass for that. But this exemplifies that with a lot of decks, it's no longer just the core generics and legendaries. You've also got to start forking out a lot of money just for some blues if you want to play a fully tuned list. And this all combined has 100,000% been a barrier of entry for this game, making these reprints very necessary. So far, we've already seen 3 of the 4 staples I'd suggested in my older video, Command & Conquer, Codex of Frailty, and Warmonger's Diplomacy, with what's almost guaranteed to be the 4th, Enlightened Strike and Compendium of Wraith. Also, as I had suggested, these were printed in the expansion slot, but something I didn't predict is that the new versions were upshifted to Legendary. And while at first this was rather concerning, it seems like this was actually a decent call. Looking at the prices before and after the release of each set, CNC went from about 100 down to between 70 and 80, Codex of Frailty went from 85 down to 30 to 35, and Warmongers has gone from 53 to 35-40. With these reprints, these cards are now far more accessible than they were, especially compared to the higher prices when I made my previous video, but they didn't become completely worthless. Now, a playset of Codexes costs what one used to. Warmongers is no longer a grossly overpriced tech piece, and even with CNC, you're saving about $60 on your playset. I mean, I still think CNC should come down a bit more, but it's still an improvement. But they didn't just do the big staples, they started putting things like Heist, Call to the Grave, and Terra Asunder in the Armory decks, improving the value of the products and making it that much easier to get the cards for each specific deck. And then we get to sets like Super Slam and the upcoming Compendium of Wraith, where they just went wild. Super Slam didn't just have Warmongers, it had Flick Knives, New Horizons, Snag, Felling of the Crown, and Plow Under. And Compendium, well, like I said, it looks like we're getting E-Strike, but we also know that there's a reprint of Shelter from the Storm, Fandel Spring Tunic, Balance of Justice, and holy shit, they're actually doing it! They're reprinting Fables! So far, we only have confirmation on Eye of Ophidia, which is a $400+ card. For a lot of people on the outside of this game looking in, that's just absurd. I mean, if Fables were just these niche sort of playable cards that maybe one deck ran, sure, it wouldn't be so bad. In fact, that was the argument people used to make when it was only played in Kano. But when it's very good in one of the top decks, and LSS have started making some extremely playable Fables like Riches of Tropeldani, well, this is where you'll start to see some decks costing about $1,500. Now, this isn't to say Fables are played in all decks. In fact, most aren't running them, and those will range from $400 to $900 for a tuned list, which is still a lot, but it's significantly cheaper when you don't have to shell out hundreds of dollars just for a single card. That said, having very hard to get cards, while great on the collector side of things, is pretty rough for a competitive card game. Sure, once you have one, you never need to buy it again, but I think it's fair to say that the consensus from the community at large is that Fables were a problem, and so seeing them reprinted is extremely welcome. I think it's pretty clear at this point that LSS are genuinely trying to make this game more accessible. Every time I make videos like this talking about the price of the game, I inevitably get comments from people saying stuff like, LSS is the most predatory TCG company because the game is expensive, but the sheer amount of reprints they've been pumping out completely destroys that argument. Not that it was a good argument to begin with, but people were making it. I'm also, not really sure how anyone else in the world can be that most predatory TCG company when WotC exists, but whatever. I'm just a dude in a room chatting about cardboard, what do I know? But seriously, as much as I believe there needs to be some value in the market for the game's ecosystem to flourish, the price of this game has gotten out of hand. With all the new competing TCGs, having Fab be the most expensive to get into is a tough sell, and so seeing LSS take measures to get cards into players' hands is really great to see. This, alongside Silver Age, should hopefully do wonders for the game and making it far more appealing to the average card gamer to at least try. Because let's be real folks, Flesh and Blood is genuinely one of the best games out there. I'm sure many of you believe that, and even people who couldn't quite get into the game also say the same thing. Fab is one of the best game systems ever, but it's just really expensive. But now, with the reprinting of many Majestics, Legendaries, and even Fableds, the price is coming down to a reasonable range. Already, we've seen decks that used to cost $1,000 drop by a few $100. I mean, looking at Michael Yazker's World Championship Syndra deck, it's just under $700, which was not the case before Flick Knives was reprinted. And with Shelter from the Storm soon to be reprinted, the price of this deck is going to drop even more. Personally, I'd like to see Shelter drop to at least $50 or so, as that's what I think the card should have been worth in the first place, and if that happens, this Syndra deck would cost $150 less. And honestly, $520 for a fully tuned deck is pretty damn good considering how competitive this game is. So yes, I think these reprints have done an overwhelming amount of good and will continue to do so. Again, this has opened up a window of time where things are more accessible, but as long as LSS doesn't start to mass reprint these cards in 2 sets later, these prices will start to trickle up and then will need to be reprinted once again, which is fine for me. I actually love getting good reprints in sets because it makes opening boxes or packs way more worth it. My favorite Magic sets were always the Master Series because of the sheer reprint value in them, so I'm super happy to see more great cards like Enlightened Strike and Tunic in sets like Compendium. That all said, there is the possibility for reprints to go too far, where players who spend a lot of money on a set of cards get hosed as the value tanks to bulk prices. And this is where reprints can go from good to, well, Super Slam was an interesting set. I think it's fair to say that it's the weakest set since Heavy Hitters. Funny how it was literally Heavy Hitters 2, but it came with more reprints than we'd ever seen in a normal set. Really, the only sets that have done more reprints than it were History Pack, the literal reprint sets. And while I was extremely happy to see so many cards getting reprinted in Super Slam, it did bring with it examples of where reprints can go very right, like with Warmongers and Snag, and also where it can go very wrong, like with Felling of the Crown and Plow Under. These two cards are the pinnacle of Earth Majestics. I mean, Felling is literally one of the most powerful Majestics in the entire game, and before the reprints, they were very expensive. too expensive. Now, to set this all up, the reason that these two cards were expensive was a combination of them being the top cards in Earth decks, as well as them coming from the very first set with allocation issues, Rosetta. After Part of the Mistveil, print runs seemed to tighten by a lot, or the game had grown more than LSS envisioned, but whatever the case was, Rosetta is damn near impossible to find, and it ran out not long after release. This made anything in the set that is even remotely popular quite expensive. For example, many of the Lightning cards back when Aurora was around cost a pretty penny, and even now still hold value. This all led to Felling of the Crown peaking at about $75 and Plow Under peaking at almost $45. Now, these prices did start to drift down over time, and just before Super Slam released, Felling had settled at around $50 and Plow Under sat at about $30. And it can very easily be argued that even then, these prices were still too high. These cards were only played in 3 decks, and really, if it hadn't been for the limitation of Rosetta, they never would have been that expensive. However, what happened with the reprints was something that I, and I'm sure most of you, never expected. Felling of the Crown now sits at a whopping $7, with Plow Under coming at an astounding $3. Actually, scratch that. As I've been writing this script, there are now people listing it for $1. That means that Felling dropped around 86% and Plow Under dropped over 90%. Sorry, I shouldn't say dropped, I should say these cards were absolutely and completely nuked from orbit. Remember when I said that cards should have some value because it's what incentivizes stores and players to open boxes and makes the whole ecosystem work? I absolutely agree that Felling and Plow needed reprints, but this is too far. I thought that if Felling could be 20 to 25 and Plow is 10 to 15, that it would be a perfect middle ground. Much cheaper than they were, but not so cheap that pulling one in a pack was just depressing. Now, I'm certain that I'm going to get comments saying that these cards tanking is actually a good thing for the game because now people can buy them for super cheap, but let me explain why tanking a card by 90% of its value is actually a bad thing, especially if it were to continue to happen. Let's start with the players. If it became the norm for cards to release, be very expensive, and then a year or so later they were reprinted into the ground, would you want to buy boxes? What about singles? Would you buy the new Hot Majestic for $50+ if you knew in a year it would be $5? I'm guessing probably not. I'm guessing that, unless you're in the small percentage of players going to top tournaments, you probably wouldn't be buying staple cards for this price. You also might avoid buying any boxes, because what's the point? Why chase the new cards when they'll be worthless soon? And what about all the players who bought their Fellings and Plows before the reprints were announced? Imagine you're just the normal average player, you go to your armories, and you really love Florian or Verdants, so you buy your Fellings and your Plows. Cost you a little over a couple hundred, but now you get to play these awesome cards. Then you see that they're getting reprinted. Well, okay, that sucks, but hey, at least you got them now, and it's not like you're getting totally screwed. Okay, you got totally screwed. That $240 you spent could have been $30 had you simply waited another month or two. I hope the fact that these have dropped even more in the time between scripting and editing this video emphasizes my point on just how overboard these reprints went. I wouldn't be surprised if this sort of thing pushes some people out of the game because no one likes feeling like they got screwed. And anyone who bought these cards before the reprint, they got screwed. Now, I'm sure many of us who have been around in TCGs for a long time have all experienced the burn of a reprint at some point. You finally decide to buy a card, and the moment you pay, a reprint is announced. But it's not terrible when the reprints still have value, and the price will go back up if you ever want to sell those cards later to buy into something else. But Felling and Plow, these aren't going to be even near their previous prices anytime soon. They tanked by 85 to 90% in value. Sure, Codex lost 65% of its value, but $30 is still a very solid pull from a box. Felling, on the other hand, is barely over the price of a pack, and Plow Under is a literal bulk Majestic now. Now, what if you're a store? Let's say the next set of reprints in Compendium of Wraith tank prices this much again. Are you going to be cracking as many boxes if the value isn't there? I mean, I guess if the new cards are worth a lot, you might, but what if this happens again and again? Slowly over time, stores will lose trust. No one will want to open up boxes to sell singles if they know that players won't be willing to buy them when they could just wait a bit and buy them for dirt cheap. Slowly but surely, repeatedly drastically tanking the value of cards will absolutely kill Flesh and Blood. And this is all just talking about Majestics. We also saw New Horizons and Flick Knives drop drastically in price with the reprints. Now, to be fair, New Horizons isn't really being played right now, but Flick Knives very much is. And now the lowest rarity of flick knives is $20, down from about $100. And while this card was, like Felling and Plow, overinflated due to lack of supply, there's still the question to be asked as to whether these reprints were too much. Maybe there should have just been one version as a reprint instead of two. Now thankfully, I do not think that this is actually a sign of what's to come. LSS have been pretty openly cognizant of the reality that there needs to be money in the game in order for it to survive. And so I do think that this scenario is something that will only happen occasionally rather than it being the norm. I'm perfectly happy to see things reprinted, but tanking card value so abruptly can cause a lot of issues, more if it's done on repeat. But the reality is, it's very difficult to know exactly when to do a reprint and how much to print for it, so I do expect to see fluctuations. Sometimes we'll get C&C where the reprint doesn't do enough, other times it'll be just right like Codex, and sometimes we'll get Felling and Plow where, oh good God, $1? One freaking dollar? Oh, how the mighty have fallen. Reprints are a necessary and very healthy part of a player-driven TCG when done right. As the player base grows, demand goes up, and card availability shrinks, leading to higher and higher prices, as well as difficulty even finding copies. If this becomes too unbalanced, a game can suffer greatly as people simply leave to play something cheaper and easier to get a hold of. However, if reprints are done too drastically, like tanking 90% of a card's value, this can cause issues in the opposite direction, where players and stores stop trusting the company making the game and will no longer be willing to buy an open product. It's a very tight line to get it right, and no company will be perfect. On top of that, the price range to hit is a bit up in the air as it's really subject to personal opinion. I'm willing to bet that none of you who are at this point in the video have agreed with absolutely everything I've said. Maybe you think cards should be cheaper than I do, or maybe you think they should be a bit more, but I do hope that I've laid out my arguments well. I like reprints. It makes cards cheaper for a time, it gives the company the chance to do different arts, and I think it makes opening packs way more fun. I am super stoked to open some Compendium of Wraith, both for the new cards and to get Alt Art and Lightning Strikes and maybe even a Tunic. I hope that these upcoming reprints bring the cost of the game down without tanking the prices completely, and I do expect that if LSS doesn't reprint these cards again for a while, the prices will slowly climb back up. That all said, I do wonder how long this reprint train will go on for. I expect reprints to be a part of Armory decks moving forward as they add a lot of value to the products, and I expect us to see at least a card in the expansion slot, but I don't expect to see such mass reprints in every set like we have in Super Slam and Compendium. I think at the moment what we're seeing is LSS playing catch up. The prices of cards in this game have gone steadily up over the years, really spiking in the last two, and now the company is trying to bring those prices down to a reasonable level. I think that with some cards they've done an excellent job, while with others they've either under or overshot it. But I really do expect this to just be something that happens. You can't expect them to be able to predict the prices and market perfectly, but I am also willing to bet that those at the company who decide what should be reprinted and when to do it are paying close attention and are going to adjust as time goes on. It's truly a difficult thing to balance. On one hand, you need enough reprints to bring the price down so new players can get cards, but on the other hand, if you tank too many cards too quickly, you lose the trust of existing players and stores. I don't envy LSS's position on this, but I am very happy to be sitting on the sidelines able to make videos about it. Anyways, thank you very much for watching, and an extra special mega thanks to all of my sexy Chadley patrons. Huge shout outs to the GigaChads Geeks First, Elixir, Vinny, John, Ty, Chemical, and Dark Memoria. Then we've got the Alpha Chads, Thomas, Zajima, Approximo, and Mike. And then there's the Super Chads, Cece, Ben, Yogbadoodles21, Kevin, and Wolf Shadowmancer. Thanks again as always, and until next time, stay Chadly, my friends.